So our next speaker is Mr. Leonel Groisman from the Uruguayan Consenso for Palestino-Israelí Peace from Montevideo. After finishing his training at Harvard in negotiations, he taught negotiation aptitudes in a number of different universities in Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, and Peru. He also worked as a consultant for the President's Office, the Ministry of Defense, and other national and international entities. We are very pleased to have him here with us. You have the floor, sir. Excellency, Mr. Chairman, representative of the Palestinian state, good morning one and all. What I'd first like to say is that
Ahora sí? ¿Sí?
Is it all right now? Everything's okay now? It's working? Yes. Good. What I'd like to start by saying is that I observe that on an ongoing basis we are mixing up terms, and I think it would be good to make a distinction between these terms. When I first came across this issue, I tended to confuse Arab, Muslim, and Islamist, not even getting into Sunni and Shiite. Just to give you an example, in the case of Jews, it's also important to make some distinctions, and I think that these distinctions between terms will have a relationship with the substantive issues we have before us in terms of trying to resolve this conflict. Making a distinction between Jew, Israeli, government of Israel, I think that's key. It's important if we want to aim our darts at the target of the actual problems. And that in turn will make it possible for us in the diaspora to be able to negotiate It will make it possible for diasporas to be in ongoing dialogue, and part of that is because we've been able to make distinctions between these various terms. I'm going to address a number of different subjects here, most of them from a professional point of view. That's my beginning, and then I'll get into the heart of the matter, the actual problem at hand. First, the diasporas achieve dialogue, and what that means is understanding that in a diaspora there is the possibility of not seeing each other as enemies, but rather as partners in conflict. It means including two or more points of view, and people with these different points of view can work together in order to take specific action and not just talk. There are many examples whereby a diaspora or people in the diaspora tends to be much more fanatic than the people who live in the epicenter of the conflict. The Armenian people are very familiar with this phenomenon, for example, as are the Kurdish people and the Irish. And we could give more examples of the same phenomenon. Our working methodology has been empirically proven in diasporas in conflict, and it's led to results because the diasporas have been transformed into active communities building peace through specific action, not just through dialogue. Moreover, they create an understanding, and then that, of course, tends to point directly at the prejudices we might have. I'll just take a minute here to tell you a story. In my training as a Jew, I never knew what the Nakba was. Nobody ever told me about the Nakba. It was a marvelous day when I learned about it. It was the day of independence and achieving the dreams of the past. Not the Nakba. And then one day I heard about it. I heard a speech about it. When I heard about this from someone, and of course those of you from the Palestinian community will be familiar with what this is, and those who are familiar with the rights. I'm sorry? Argentina, says the speaker. Palestine. Lives in Argentina. When I came across that story, first I thought it was a lie. In my knowledge or the stories I knew, I didn't know anything about it. And I apologize for the slight digression, but I think it's an important example of the transformative power of dialogue. So as I was saying, I thought that it was a lie. And then I was talking about this with Raphael and remembering this. And I was telling him that the next day after I heard about this, I went to my father and I was very angry and I said, told him that I'd been lied to. I felt I'd been lied to. And it hadn't occurred to them to tell that part of the story either. And moreover, it's important to bear in mind that the Palestinian question had always been kept in mind from my father, my grandfather, my aunt. They were aware of it, but I never heard them talk about the Nakba. So when I came across this, I was able to understand some of the pain, but also that story was reconstructed for me from two completely different points of view, opposite points of view, antagonistic almost. Two completely different points of view on what happened on a specific day, the events of a given day. And I feel a special pain in recognizing that for many years I celebrated the moment which was the moment of greatest pain for the Palestinian people.
Desde aquella experiencia,
From that experience onward, a very revealing experience, from that time onward, I have loved even more. I've been studying negotiations from well before that, but that appearance, which was very revealing of a person in my life, a very emblematic activist for human rights, an extraordinary man, was the person who brought these revelations to me. He has been involved not only in the Condor plan in Uruguay and Argentina, but he's also played an active role in these difficult times that we Jewish people are experiencing between the discrepancy of the government of Israel and the people. Another person who has never vacillated in this project, and a great friend, Juan Ferreira, also dedicated to human rights. So let me get back to what I had planned to talk about. So what is consensus? Let's look at that a little bit. I'm going to let you read this, and the interpreter will sight translate it. Initiative of peace in which there's a convergence of Jews, Palestinians, and citizens, descendants of other peoples, with the view to bringing from the diaspora and through understanding the creation of specific action for the peace process in the Middle East. Those who belong to this are, I'm going to read it so that it can be interpreted into English. It says the speaker, initiative of peace, whereby there's agreement amongst Jewish people, Palestinians, and citizens, descendants of other peoples with the view of contributing from the diaspora to the understanding and the creation of specific action in the peace process of the Middle East. We who belong to it are party to a solution which views two people, two states, with a capital in Jerusalem, Al-Quds and Jerusalem, with fair and lasting peace, secure borders based on the pre-1967 borders, and a negotiated solution to the problem of the refugees. What this means is that a consensus for peace for Palestinians and Israelis in Uruguay, and in fact we had the honor of founding the Latin American consensus with the support of the foreign ministry and Luis Armado, the foreign minister. We have asked those who belong to this to share this point of view of what consensus is. There are a couple of ideas I'd like to share with you. We used to say that the role of the diaspora was the role of reproducing the conflict. If over there we talk, here we talk. If over there we fight, here we fight. If over there we hate each other, then we're going to hate each other here. Our consensus for peace seeks to maintain as a constant all actions geared to promoting peace, above and beyond the results that might be achieved or not in the epicenter of the conflict. And I'd just like to point to the fact that here, this is a transformation. It takes fanatic action and transforms it into action for peace. I understand some of you who believe that dialogue is not enough, because I share that idea that dialogue is not enough. But nor do I believe that dialogue and action together in the diaspora is a minor issue. By way of illustration, we say sometimes it's enough to push a button. In Montevideo and in Argentina, we have conflict between our countries about the installation of a paper factory. The court in The Hague handed down its ruling saying that the paper factory could continue operating in Uruguay. Do you believe that that put an end to the conflict? Absolutely not. All you have to do is go to the town of Guayaquil, which is the wounded city where the paper factory was, to understand that the conflict is not resolved through legal action, nor is there any organization, the United Nations, for no matter how much authority they might have, that can rebuild the link or build different links and can contribute to the peace process between these peoples. And that's why it's necessary, and I would say it's even indispensable, to have action in the diaspora. I wonder, well, clearly we're not prepared for what's being experienced in the Middle East, but you'll no doubt share with me that nor are we prepared for peace. We are not prepared to live in peace. If there's peace, what are we going to do with all the hatred? What are we going to do with the resentment? What will we do with the divisions? We are not ready. And to prepare ourselves for the peace process, which is, as I said, not just necessary, it's actually vital, that means that organized civil society needs to start taking the reins of the process to get us ready, to prepare us, so that we can create the necessary conditions to have lasting peace in the Middle East. It's important to understand that this situation is reproduced in other places in exactly the same manner. And with the theoretical foundation that was illustrated yesterday by Dr. Kaufman about nationalism in the long run and long-distance nationalism. I think it also very much illustrates what I'm going to try and address now, and I'll give you a specific example by way of illustration. In Uruguay, the Consensus for Palestine-Israeli Peace has a direct link with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Minister Amado has listened to us very generously 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Every time we've had a concern, we've been able to bring it to him. So we went to tell him that we were supporting Palestinians being admitted as a member state. And this morning there was a meeting. We can't go ask him, but Uruguay needs to drive forward Palestinians' adherence with full rights. In other words, not just with a voice, but also have a vote. And I'm sure that at that time the minister listened to us, and today again he will listen to us. There's specific action. For example, when we were working with the Palestinian ambassador, we were able to achieve that the community of the Palestinians and the Uruguayans were able to be present together in the ministry in an act of support for the foundation of a Palestinian state definitively in the Middle East. These are specific actions that the diaspora is capable of taking, and it can't be done from international organizations.
So this means that we are going to, or does this mean that we're not going to recognize the value of concrete action, such as that which my colleague mentioned? The boycott of products. Of course not. Of course it doesn't mean that. We will support that. We'll support those efforts. But we believe in what has come to be called intelligent sanctions, because we're against occupied territories, and so we will boycott the products that come from the occupied territories. So what's the value in this? In the general perception, if I'm going to ask someone that doesn't understand the conflict that they join a boycott of products created in occupied territories, it's much more simple of a task for me than to ask someone that they come to cooperate with a boycott against all products from Israel. Because it's one thing to boycott a state, and it's another thing to boycott the actions undertaken, or certain actions undertaken by that state. And I don't think these two things should be confused or mixed. I would even say as well that in this inclusive action, for example, His Excellency Hacer has made a speech that I completely understood. I could have signed on to that speech he made. But I find a division on this point. I'm not willing to boycott the state of Israel. I am willing to boycott the actions, certain actions, in this case, the matter of the occupied territories. Israel is the occupying power. I have absolutely no doubt about that. But among other things, not just because it's simpler to explain, but because it's more fair, we should believe in what the Americans have referred to as intelligent sanctions. I'm going to tell you about a situation that we saw in Uruguay. After a meeting, there were 25 Jews and 25 Arabs. We met at the Foreign Ministry, and we said, close the doors. It's going to be a bloodbath. But against all expectations, they ended the meeting hugging each other, recognizing each other's plight. We saw with the Turks, the Russians, and sometimes there's a lack of distinction between a Syrian or a Palestinian or someone from Lebanon. Speaking of the case of Uruguay, sometimes people didn't make these distinctions. But after this meeting, someone from the Jewish communities said, this person was 50 or 60 years old, and this person says to me, is it true that meeting happened? And he said, but they don't hate us? How is that possible that meeting was held? Don't they hate us? How did they meet? How were they able to meet together? Don't they hate us? So the infinite majority of Jews, at least in Uruguay, and I can't speak to other countries, believe that all Palestinians hate all Jews. As I am sure many Palestinians must believe that all Jews hate the Palestinians. So it's really good for us to take concrete actions to disseminate this type of event that proved the opposite. I'm going to continue because otherwise I won't be able to wrap up, but I do want to say something based on this. There are no fixed lines. My rival today might be my partner tomorrow. This has been proven through history. There are no permanent camps. Let's prepare to be partners. Let's prepare to be partners as of now in building a long-term peace with concrete actions. As I was saying, we come from Uruguay. Here's the world, here's Latin America, and here's our small country, Uruguay. For those of you who don't know where Uruguay is. Uruguay is a land of diasporas. We're all immigrants. It is not a source of pride for me. It's a great embarrassment to say that our indigenous people were exterminated. So everyone who lives there now is part of a diaspora, which allows us to understand this problem, perhaps. I'm going to give you some indications of immigration in Uruguay. I think it's important that we share this. Note that the arrival of the Syrian Lebanese almost comes at the same time as the arrival of the Jews in Uruguay. The Palestinians come much later, and mostly in the city of Chuy. And they come from Brazil, actually. This is what happened in Uruguay. This is how we saw the different percentages of Uruguayans and foreigners. Half of the population was from diaspora. So we learned to absorb and how to interact with the diaspora. Juan Raúl Ferreira has focused on some of the key pillars of our country, strict adherence to international law, a long democratic tradition, and others. But also, there's a role that was played in the British Mandate and the partition. Here we see the beginning of our focus on this. There's the city of Chuy in red, which shares a border with Brazil. My colleague, João Diora, will be speaking to this, but I did want to indicate that you see here this tree. This tree was planted by at least two generous souls. My dear friend, a refugee from 48, El Jundi, and Jewish families from the city of Chuy, together with the support of a number of Christians. In the concrete case of Montevideo, we have a long history of Jews and Christians getting along. This dates back to 1954. We already have an experience of different communities beginning to hold discussions with each other. So in Uruguay, in particular, the actions that William Moody referred to as the third side in the peaceful settlement of disputes. It's worth looking at this. But there's a third side web site as well that you can learn about this effort. This played a key role in the Road of Abraham, where we see Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, the road of Abraham, the path of Abraham. So the third side, that's it, those who aren't part of the conflict, but they do have a key role. The third side refers to those who are neither Jews nor Palestinians, but that are, for some reason, involved in the situation. For the Uruguayan society, with Italians and Spaniards, Jews, Palestinians, it's good to know that the conflict between two different communities is a conflict that the whole society has to bear. It's important to know that this third side, those that aren't Jewish and that aren't Jews or Palestinians or descendants thereof, they can play a key role. The consensus then is organized more or less thus. There are three groups, really. There's the third side, 3 members of the third side, 2 Jews, and 2 Palestinians. And then there are other supporters. For example, in building a film library, we have almost 100 movies that focus on the situation in Palestine and Israel. And some of these films, come from the 1960s. The first of them show peaceful coexistence. Some of them allow us to see how the link between Jews and Palestinians have deteriorated. He said he used to go play with Jews when he was a child, that they were friends of his. So we looked for support from the foreign ministry, for example. They support us, they help us to build a network that helps us to promote this movement. And to support this, also, we have a possibility of building peace from the ground up. The Oslo Accords, and not just the Oslo Accords, but the Oslo Accords do show that the most daring, innovative, creative ideas, the best solutions, did not come from the governments. They came from civil society. So we do need to create incentives for the systematic development of solutions. That's why we sign on to any solution that can be mutually agreed upon. This type of diplomacy, maybe this is an easier way to understand it, citizen diplomacy, is not seeking to supplant state diplomacy. Supplant or substitute. No, the idea is to cooperate with, to assist, to prepare the people for peace, to complement. And we need creative solutions for all of this. In our meetings, we've done some important things. There was the meeting that I mentioned earlier with 25 Jews and 25 Arabs, the foreign ministry. There's a 666 meeting. We had Jewish and Arab women present at meetings. I actually didn't agree with the meeting because I believed it to be sexist, really. It's just not letting the men in. But I do understand. I came to understand the absolutely essential role, the crucial role that women have in the peaceful settlement of disputes. We have our film library that I mentioned as well. Dr. Kaufman was named an honorific President of our Republic and an illustrious citizen of the city of Montevideo. And next year, we have a training program in the foreign minister with 25 Jews and 25 Arabs. This will take place in the city of Chuy. A citizen diplomacy course with Dr. Eddie Kaufman. But the Palestinian Authority's representative, the ambassador, will also be working in London along these lines. So the idea is to disseminate internationally what can be done with citizen diplomacy. It's not that we show solidarity with the government, said Mr. Caetano in a meeting of the Uruguayan Jewish community. He's Italian. He said we aren't going to show solidarity with governments. We are going to show solidarity with people, with groups of people. I wish to declare my utmost solidarity with the Palestinian people because there are three things that I want to underscore. We are bonded by love, because what we're doing here right now is an act of love. We are bound as well by pain, because we, each of us in our diasporas, have suffered. This is a factor that brings us together. If we all value life and the other peoples, we're bound. And we are also bound by hope, the hope of seeing two peoples and two seats two people and two states with safe borders and prosperity on equal footing. What has been proven is that what has been done so far has not worked. I want to ask those who believe that we must be allowed to do what we're doing. An eye for an eye, and everyone is blind. Thank you very much.